There have been other projects that I courted and talked about doing, and they worked out to be perfectly good projects, but I knew that they weren't going to be good enough, and that I was going to be taking a step back for my entire gender.
Patty, thank you so much for joining us here today. The Oscar list came out a few hours ago. One of the things that really stood out is that there are no women nominated for Best Director.
Yes.
And none of the Best Pictures have women directing those films. Is that a surprise? Should that still be happening?
It's not a surprise. It's always been the way. And I hope it doesn't mean that we're headed that way. Fortunately, there has been a lot of progress in other areas, even this Oscars of what I saw this far, Black Panther. I think that there are some good boundaries, that have been crossed this time. And so that's great. It's always disappointing, but it's never surprising.
Yeah. One of the things that you've talked about very openly is how much weight you put on yourself in the decisions that you make and how you negotiate for your paycheck, that what you're doing will have a ripple beyond just you and your family, that you are doing things that might set precedent for other women in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Would you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to find yourself in this position. There's obviously a huge pay disparity in it, and there's been a disparity of success across the board, and we're all becoming more aware of that. I was never so aware of it years ago, but now I really see it. And there are a couple of things in place that keep that as it is. In Hollywood, the thing that has been keeping it that way, there is something that we call the quote system, which makes sense if you are someone who's been hired for X amount of money and now you're being hired, another time, you can either ask for a small raise or whatever. Subsequently, you move your way up. However, always when people have big successes, it breaks the rules of that. They go from being on a soap opera to being a movie star. It breaks those rules. One of the places where it really fails is when it's holding women to build up their quote system the same way men do, because women have had a harder time getting their movies made. And so it means that if you direct a lot less often, you're never getting that chance to build your rate up. I definitely felt that some of that was at play in our industry. And so we could talk about those things all day long, but at the end of the day, I don't care. I want to be being paid a parallel to the men who are directing blockbusters of this type. And the only way that we ever get here is by saying that that's absolutely necessary for me to make a stand. And so I was very lucky that I got supported to do that, but it's never pleasant to be, because it's also, everybody has talked about how women are looked down upon for asking for money, and it's seen in a much more unflattering light. And that's a bummer, but because there really was a period of time that negotiation was going on, and I was hearing about it talked about in the public eye, where you do hear a lot of the descriptives around it, where it's like, whoa, is she all about the money? And you're like, yeah, this is how it happens. This is how it happens. If I was a guy and I was playing hardball, it would be totally different. But as a woman playing hardball, it was treated a little differently. So I've seen it happen with other friends of mine who were women who'd had to go through the same thing. And you just have to muscle through it. It was made much easier because I believed in its importance.
But you're talking about the negotiation for the Wonder Woman sequel.
Yeah, if not me, who says I want to be getting paid the exact same as the men who are directing parallel successes?
Typically in a negotiation, you get to go in and just represent yourself. What do I need to be successful? Now you have to go in and say, what do I do that will actually talk to other women and put other women on this path?
Yeah.
And is that
women's whole careers are sometimes, or at least not all women, but many women's whole careers are that way. Who was it? I was just listening to in the Ruth Bader Ginsburg documentary where she was talking about I had to be excellent because if I dropped the ball, it was speaking for all women. I couldn't relate more. There have been other projects that I courted and talked about doing, and they worked out to be perfectly good projects, but I knew that they weren't going to be good enough, and that I was going to be taking a step back for my entire gender. If I did it and it didn't work out, it was going to be a huge blow for everybody. And so I said, I can't afford to make a dodgy movie, or it says something about, oh, women directors can't direct this kind of thing. I have to be representing that at the same time as I'm thinking about my career to a certain extent. We're not there yet, but I'm hoping that it's right around the corner.
Okay.
Yeah. And certainly there are women who have gotten to great power in their careers. You know, Oprah Winfrey, J.K. Rowling. There are people who have become incredibly established in their success, and it's no longer a question. They are successful and powerful people. I think that's wonderful.
I talk to a lot of business leaders. I never ask men these questions.
Yeah.
This never comes up like, oh, you made a bad decision with your company. Don't you think that reflects badly on men also?
Amazing, right?
Yeah. Are you sick of hearing these questions?
I'm a lot of things. I'm complex. I have complex thoughts about it because it was a surprise that it would be such a topic in my career because I didn't realize that I had grown up watching lots of films by all kinds of women and men and all kinds of international. Living in New York, what you watch is very universal. And even before I lived here, you're seeing indie films and small films. So I was surprised where we were in the world when I realized this was such an issue, women directors and different kinds of stories. So therefore, yes, it's a bummer that it so defines one's career, but I'm also aware that it has to be talked about. So therefore, I'm perfectly willing to talk about it. I don't want to stick my head in the sand. It's a real issue.
Would you talk a little bit about your work ethic? I've seen people talk about you on set. You're there before everyone else is. You're there after they leave.
Oh, that's nice. It's nice to hear.
Do you consider yourself, how do you describe yourself as a manager or director?
I do consider myself, it's not that I consider myself an extremely hard worker. I do believe in the discipline of working hard. So I am trying to always give absolutely everything I have to something. It's interesting. I'm probably that way anyway, and my father was a fighter pilot and very that way as well. And so I probably come from that training, even as a child. I hearken back to when I was a PA, which is production assistant in film, right out of college in '94, I ended up getting a chance to meet a camera crew who did very high-end commercials. And they were very skeptical of me, and they said, sure, you can work for us if you're going to work for free for 6 months, and you have to memorize absolutely everything about cameras. You have to be here 3 hours early. You have to take apart a lens, want to know the flange focal distance of every camera.